Welcome back to the TPS Podcast. TPS stands for Trillions Per Second, named after the book. Today, we pay tribute to the open-source lineage of the TPS protocol. So grab your matcha lattes and let's dive right in.
It is good to be back. And honestly, I'm glad you mentioned the lattes because we are going to need the caffeine today. This isn't our usual look at, the mechanics of the simulation or the physics of time. Today feels heavier, in a good way.
Heavier how? Like, are we talking dense textbook heavy? Because I might need a second matcha?
No, not like that. More historical weight, gravitas. We've spent so much time in previous deep dives looking at the what. What is the simulation? What's the refresh rate? What are the axioms of latency?
Right. We talk about the TPS protocol like it's this shiny new piece of software that just dropped on GitHub yesterday.
Exactly. Like download the manual, hack your reality. It has this very futuristic, almost cyberpunk vibe to it.
Yeah, for sure.
But today we are pivoting to the who. Because as the source material, and we're talking specifically 04 lineage.pdf and the devlog 009 points out, the code we are running wasn't written in a vacuum.
Right.
It wasn't written by an AI, and it certainly wasn't written by some guy in a garage in Silicon Valley last week.
This is the part that really caught me off guard when I was going through the prep material. The document calls it the Commit History of Enlightenment, which is just... what a frame.
It's the perfect frame, isn't it? It reframes this whole path not as some, mystical journey into the clouds, but as a software development project, a project that's been active, open source, and iterated upon for 2,500 years.
That's a long time to keep a repository active. I mean, most GitHub projects are abandoned after, 6 months?
It is the longest running open source project in human history, period. And the cast of characters we're about to meet.
Yeah.
They aren't just these dusty historical figures or, saints in robes staring at walls. The project refers to them as the dev team.
Oh, I love that, the dev team. It just makes it so much more approachable.
And we need to give them their due. I mean, we are talking about the back-end engineers who built the actual database structures of the mine,
right.
The archivists who saved the documentation when civilization was literally collapsing around them, the optimizers who figured out how to get this ancient code to run on modern hardware OS. These are the hackers who spent centuries debugging the human condition so that we could have a manual today.
It's interesting you say debugging, because when we think of ancient wisdom, we usually think of poetry, right? Vague metaphors, be like water.
The sound of one hand clapping?
Yeah, exactly. And that stuff is beautiful, but it's not exactly a technical spec.
Right, and that stuff has its place, but the lineage we're looking at today, the specific TPS lineage, is different. It's technical, it's incredibly precise. And before we even meet the team, we have to set the context,
Okay.
The sources mention we are looking at a very specific branch of the protocol. This isn't just General Buddhism 101. This is the open source branch known as Hardcore Dharma.
Hardcore Dharma. That sounds intense, like extreme sports for meditators or something.
It sort of is, in a way. If you look at the master system lexicon we have in the stack, it really makes a clear distinction. Hardcore Dharma isn't about feeling good or religious observance or wearing the right beads. It's about stripping away the bloatware.
Okay, let's unpack bloatware, because in the tech world, that's all the pre-installed junk on your new laptop that slows everything down. What is spiritual bloatware?
It's the rituals. It's the cultural dogma. It's the user interface that makes things look pretty but just eats up all your RAM. Lighting incense is nice.
Sure.
Chanting in a language you don't understand can be calming. But does it actually hack the kernel of your mind? Does it rewrite the source code of suffering?
Probably not. It's more like a screensaver. It looks nice, but it's not doing any real work.
Exactly. It's a screensaver. The developers we are honoring today are the ones who ruthlessly, and I mean ruthlessly, cut the bloat to reveal the raw code underneath. They were the kernel developers. And it all starts with an origin story that I think will surprise a lot of people. It certainly surprised me.
You mean the origin of open source itself?
The origin of open source itself. We usually trace the open source movement back to, the 1980s? Richard Stallman, Linus Torvald.
Yeah, the GNU Manifesto, all that. That's the standard narrative.
The TPS lineage traces it back a little further to 868 CE.
868. That is,
right.
Wow. That's before the printing press in Europe. That's before the Magna Carta. That's ancient.
It is. We're looking at a source document here. TPS devlog 009, the lineage.pdf. And it highlights what it calls the original open source project. And the contributor's name is Wang Ji.
Wang Ji. I admit, I had never heard this name before reading the devlog. So who was he?
Wang Ji was the man responsible for the Diamond Sutra. Now, the Diamond Sutra is famous for being the oldest complete printed book in the world. It's a scroll, actually, found in a cave in Dunhuang, China. But the TPS devlog points out something very specific about why it was printed.
I see it here in the notes. It says he commissioned the printing for universal free distribution.
Universal free distribution in 868 CE. Just stop and think about the economics of that for a second.
Wait, hold on. Printing in 868, we're talking woodblock printing, right? Carving entire pages, letter by letter, backwards, into a block of wood.
Yes. Incredibly expensive, incredibly labor-intensive. In that era, knowledge was the ultimate luxury good. Books were handwritten by scribes. They were locked in monasteries or royal libraries. You didn't just give them away.
So this guy, Wang Ji, spends what must have been a fortune carving these blocks, prints this sutra, and then just hands it out for free.
He wanted to earn merit for his parents. That was the cultural currency back then, merit. But look at the mechanism he chose. He didn't build a giant statue. He didn't donate a pile of gold to a temple. He realized that for the code, the Dharma, to actually work, it had to be accessible to every node in the network.
The source note here says, Wang Ji didn't just print a book. He launched a movement of accessible wisdom.
And that connects directly, in a straight line, to the modern open source ethos. Information wants to be free. The TPS manual explicitly states that it runs on this exact same ethos. This is not proprietary software. It's a gift economy.
That's a crucial distinction, isn't it? Because we live in a world of paywalls, subscriptions, master classes that cost you $200 for a few videos.
Exactly. If the code is locked down, you can't debug it. You can't patch it. The community can't improve it. If Wang Ji had copyrighted the Diamond Sutra, we might not be having this conversation. He set the precedent over 1,000 years ago that the source code of reality belongs to everyone. It's not a product, it's a utility.
So, okay, we have the ethos established, free the code, but now we have to talk about the architecture itself. The devlog brings up what it calls the elephant in the server room.
It does. And for the listeners who might have a background in Buddhism or who've maybe dabbled in different schools, this is a really big topic. The TPS lineage is heavily weighted toward Theravada Buddhism.
Right. And for those of us who aren't religious scholars, can we just break that down? Theravada is the oldest school, correct? The school of the elders.
Correct. It's the school that claims to stick closest to the original Pali Canon, the earliest recorded teachings of the Buddha. Now, in the modern spiritual marketplace, you've got Zen, you've got Mahayana, you have Vajrayana, which is Tibetan Buddhism. These are all different stacks.
I like the stack metaphor. So if Theravada is the original, what are the others?
Well, you could think of Mahayana like a really user-friendly OS update that came a few hundred years later. It added a lot of new features, compassion archetypes like bodhisattvas, expansive metaphysics. It's like moving from, say, DOS to Windows. It's friendlier. It has more graphics, more bells and whistles.
And Zen, where does that fit in?
Zen is like, I don't know, an intuitive gesture-based interface. It's very minimalist. It kind of hides the code. It says, don't look at the manual, just feel the swipe. It's very elegant, very direct.
But the TPS project explicitly chooses the Theravada stack, the old one. So why? Is it just saying the others are buggy, or that they're not right for this specific job?
The expert explanation here is crucial. The source says this choice is not a bug, it is a feature. Think about it from a coding perspective. If you want to hack the kernel of a system, if you want to understand the raw physics of how the simulation renders reality, you don't want a flashy UI.
You don't want the little paperclip guy popping up asking if you need help writing a letter.
Exactly. You don't want complex graphical overlays or deities or ritual magic. You want the command line.
You want the raw text.
You want the raw text. Theravada is chosen because it is the v1.0 kernel. It's the cleanest code. The devlog explains that later schools added a lot of plugins, a lot of middleware. And those plugins are great for community building or for certain personality types. But for this specific hack for system administration and simulation theory, you need the rigid, table-based architecture of the early teachings.
It's the difference between using a Mac with all its smooth animations and beautiful design and booting directly into a Linux terminal where the screen is black and the text is green.
That is the perfect analogy. It's austere, it can be dry, but it gives you root access. And because we are in the terminal, we need to define our environment. The 0201lexicon.pdf gives us the master system lexicon. Before we meet the developers, we need to know who they were working for, what system they were in.
Right. The three jewels, this is pretty standard Buddhist 101, right? The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. But the TPS reframe, oh man, I love this part. It just takes all the religion right out of it.
It does, and it has to. Because for a modern mind, bowing to a statue can feel weird. It feels like legacy mode. So let's break down the reframe.
First up, the prime user, the Buddha.
In this lineage, the Buddha isn't a god. He's not a savior. He's not some deity you pray to for a new car or promotion. He is the original sysadmin.
The original sysadmin, I love that. It implies he wasn't creating the system, he was just the first one who figured out how it actually worked.
Precisely. He was the first user to successfully debug the code. He looked at the human condition, the suffering, the dissatisfaction, the constant glitching, and he didn't say, oh, God wills it. He said, there's a bug in the code, and I'm going to find the patch. He found the exploit, the way out of the suffering loop, and he documented it.
And that documentation, that brings us to the second jewel, to the master protocol, the Dharma.
It's not Holy Scripture. It's not the Word of God. It's the source code and the kernel specs. It's the technical documentation left behind by the prime user. It's a set of instructions. If X happens, then do Y. If you see error code anger, run subroutine meta.
It's an algorithm, pure and simple.
It is purely algorithmic. It doesn't require belief. It only requires execution. You just run the code and see if you get the result.
And finally, the P2P network, the Sangha.
This is my favorite reframe, actually. Traditionally, Sangha means the community of monks and nuns, but in TPS terms, it's a distributed mesh of admins providing node connectivity.
Why is that so important? Why can't I just be a solo hacker in my basement?
Have you ever tried to debug a massive code base by yourself at 3 in the morning? You get tunnel vision, you miss the most obvious errors, you need a second pair of eyes, you need the network. We are all nodes in this mesh, validating each other's data, helping each other keep the servers running when things get weird.
So you have the sysadmin, the source code, and the network. That's the environment. Now let's meet the team that built the backend. Segment 2, the ancient developers.
The back-end engineers, let's do it.
And the first name on the list is Sariputta. The source calls him the system architect. Now, I know the Buddha is the big name, but who was Sariputta?
Sariputta is a fascinating and honestly an underrated figure. In the traditional stories, he was the Buddha's chief engineer. If the prime user, the Buddha, was a visionary Steve Jobs figure, holding up the iPhone and saying this changes everything, Sariputta was the Steve Wozniak.
Oh, okay.
He was the one in the back room, soldering the circuit boards, making sure it actually worked.
The source material mentioned a really key shift here. The prime user taught in user stories, suttas, and parables. Life is like a river, the mind is like a monkey.
Exactly. And user stories are great for the front end. They help ordinary people understand abstract concepts. They're emotionally resonant. But you can't build a database structure out of monkey metaphors. It's just too fuzzy. It's not precise enough.
You need tables. You need columns and rows.
You need rigid architecture. Sariputta's contribution was the Abhidhamma Pitaka. This is the core database structure of the entire system. And honestly, if you try to read the Abhidhamma without a guide, your brain will absolutely melt.
Why? What is it? Is it just long?
It's not just long, it's the density. It is arguably the most dense, complex psychological map ever created by a human being. Sariputta took the raw matrices, the matika, these lists of mental states, and he categorized the atomic data units.
The voxels, that's the TPS term.
The voxels, or dhammas in the original Pali. He moved the entire project from poetry to a table-based architecture. He said, okay, anger isn't just the story about how your neighbor stole your cow. That's the content. We don't care about the content. That's user data.
Right. Ignore the user data. Look at the code that's running it.
Exactly. Sariputta analyzed anger as a specific system state. It has specific inputs, like contact plus an unpleasant feeling. It has specific outputs, like heat in the body and rigidity. It has a specific duration. He broke reality down into these tiny, discrete packets of information.
So he basically pixelated the mind. He showed it wasn't a smooth, continuous movie.
Yes, that's it. He showed that what looks like a fluid movie of my life is actually just trillions of little data frames flickering on and off really, really fast. Without Sariputta, the kernel specs are literally unreadable. He turned wisdom into data.
But there was a problem, right? The source says by the 10th century, Sariputta's database had grown huge.
It was massive. The source calls it terabytes of raw logs. And that's not an exaggeration. It's 7 massive volumes of incredibly dense analysis. It was completely unreadable for anyone but the most dedicated scholar monks living in a monastery.
Enter our next developer on the team, Aniruddha, labeled here as the code minifier.
I love that title, Code Minifier. For the non-coders listening, minification is when you take a huge script file, you remove all the white space, you remove the comments, you shorten the variable names, and you crunch it down so it loads faster on a web page.
Aniruddha looked at Sariputa's massive terabyte-sized database and said, "This is too big. We need a quick start guide."
Exactly. He wrote the Abhidhamata Sangaha, which is a mouthful.
Yeah.
But in the Lineage, this is effectively the readme MD file for the entire project.
The RAID-ME, the first thing you look at.
He took those terabytes of data and minified them, compressed them into a concise summary. The source says he mapped 89 types of consciousness and 52 mental factors onto a single page interface.
Wait, pause there. 89 types of consciousness. I feel like I have maybe 3. Awake, asleep, and hungry.
Laugh. That's the default setting for most of us, yeah. But Aniruddha's map is incredibly granular. He mapped every possible state of mind, wholesome, unwholesome, resultants of past actions, purely functional consciousness. And then the 52 mental factors, these are like the colors or the adjectives of the mind. Greed, hatred, delusion, faith, mindfulness, balance.
So he basically built the periodic table of the mind.
That is the best way to think about it. Just like Mendeleev mapped the elements so chemists could understand matter, Aniruddha mapped the mental factors so we can understand the chemistry of our own minds. He made the system architecture portable. You could actually carry this map around in your head.
Okay, so we have the architect who built the database, Sariputta, and the minifier who wrote the summary, Aniruddha.
But every big open source project needs documentation. Extensive, deep documentation.
That brings us to our third ancient developer, Buddhaghosa, labeled here as the lead archivist.
The 5th century developer. And the source calls his major work the Visuddhimagga, the Linux kernel archives. That's a heavy comparison.
It is, but it's completely accurate. The context here is key. In the 5th century CE, the teachings were starting to scatter. Different monasteries in different countries had different patch notes, different oral traditions were fraying. There was a real risk of a fork in the code that would break compatibility.
So Buddhaghosa was the one who went around and merged all the branches back into the main. Pretty much. He traveled from India to Sri Lanka, which was the main repository of the teachings at the time, gathered all the commentaries, all the oral traditions, and he compiled them into one massive system manual, The Path of Purification. And it is a beast of a book. It is dense, it is technical, it is so dry to read.
So why does he matter so much to the TPS project? If it's so old and dry, why are we still referencing it?
Because he covered every single edge case.
Edge cases. You mean like bugs or weird glitches?
Exactly. When you are hacking your own mind, especially when you start messing with the clock speed of your perception, as we'll talk about later, weird things happen.
Like what kind of weird things?
You might see blinding lights. You might feel like your body is dissolving into a cloud of gnats. You might feel existential terror for no apparent reason. Or you might feel overwhelming bliss that makes you want to quit your job and just stare at a flower forever.
If you don't know that's coming.
You'll think you broke the system. You'll think you're going crazy. You'll hit a blue screen of death for the self.
Error 404. Ego not found.
Exactly. Buddhaghosa preserved the legacy manual that tells us, no, you didn't break it. This is a known issue. This is the knowledge of dissolution. Keep going. The TPS project is, in a way, just refactoring Buddhaghosa's source code. We're updating the language, putting it in a simulation theory UI, but the architecture, it's his. It's flawless.
That is profound. We are running code that was preserved by a guy in the 5th century because the architecture is still stable.
It compiles. It works every time.
Okay, so that's the ancient backend. The heavy lifting is done. The database is built. The docs are written. But as we move into the modern era, the hardware changes. The user profile changes completely.
This is the pivot point. We aren't monks living in forests anymore. We have jobs, we have mortgages, we have Twitter, X, we have constant dopamine hits pinging our phones.
The entire environment is hostile to deep work.
Totally hostile. And so we enter the 20th century optimizer, segment 3. This is where the lineage pivots from preservation to efficiency.
And the first name here is a surprise, I think, for many. Ubakin, the clock speed optimizer.
Ubakin is pivotal, absolutely pivotal. And here's the key detail that changes everything. He was not a monk.
He wasn't.
No, he was the accountant general of Burma.
The accountant general. So a government bureaucrat, a numbers guy.
A very high-ranking government official in the newly independent Burma. He had a 9-to-5 job, well, probably more like a 7-to-10 job given his position. He had a family. He had immense responsibility. He didn't have time to go sit in a cave for 20 years.
Which is the problem of the modern user. I want enlightenment, but I have a meeting at 2 p.m.
Exactly. That's the modern dilemma. So he looked at the code, the Theravada stack, and he asked, how do we optimize this? How do we strip out the latency and make it run faster? He refactored the protocol for high efficiency.
The source mentions he emphasized the clock speed of the flux. What does that mean technically? What's the flux?
This is his breakthrough. He realized that Anika, the principle of impermanence, isn't just a philosophical idea. It's not just, oh, flowers die and seasons change. It's a literal refresh rate.
Trillions per second.
There you go. Reality is rendering in frames. Yubokin realized that if you can train the mind to detect the change in sensations at a very, very high frequency, if you can feel the spark gap of the neurons firing, you can clear the malware, the old conditioning, much, much faster.
So instead of a slow, gentle scan of your mind, he basically ramped up the CPU.
He overclocked it. He taught a technique that was intense, focused, and incredibly fast. He proved that you don't need to leave the world to hack the simulation. You can do it at your desk, on your lunch break. He was the first to really democratize it and say, this is for householders.
That is incredibly validating to hear. But if you're moving that fast, if you're overclocking the system, you absolutely need a map. You need to know where you're going so you don't just completely crash.
Which brings us to our next developer, a contemporary of Yubokin, Mahasi Sayadaw, the map maker.
His big contribution is the progress of insight, the 16 stages.
If Buddhaghosa wrote the giant encyclopedic archive, Mahasi wrote the diagnostic manual. He broke the entire journey down into 16 distinct, verifiable stages.
The progress bar for your meditation.
Yes, that's it. Before Mahasi, people would just meditate and kind of hope for the best. Am I getting closer? I don't know. I feel calm today. Mahasi said, calm is nice, but it's not the point.
So what is the point, according to him?
The point is insight, capital I. And insight happens in a very specific, predictable sequence. First, you distinguish mind and matter. Then you see cause and effect. Then you hit the arising and passing away, which is like the psychedelic peak of the whole thing. And then
it sounds like it's all good from there.
Then you hit the dukkhanas, the knowledges of suffering, what some people call the dark night of the soul.
Oof. That does not sound pleasant.
It's not. It's the part of the process where the system feels like it's crashing and burning.
Yeah.
You feel fear, misery, disgust with existence itself. Now imagine hitting that stage without a map.
You'd quit instantly. You'd think, meditation's making me depressed. I'm stopping this right now.
But Mahasi's map says, no, keep going. You're not broken. You're at stage 6. You just need to push through to stage 11.
He gamified it. He gave you levels to beat.
Exactly. He gave us a roadmap so we wouldn't panic and turn back when we hit the bad neighborhoods of the mind. And he gave us the primary tool to navigate it, noting.
Noting? That's the logging tool in the TPS manual.
Right. Rising, falling, sitting, touching, thinking, fear, planning. You are generating a constant log file of every single data packet that hits your awareness. This keeps the observer module of the mind online and prevents you from getting lost in the content of the thought or feeling. It's a brilliant, simple hack.
So Mahasi gives us the Mac and the logger, but we need to scale this. We need global deployment because up until this point, this is all happening in Burma, right? It's not really known in the West.
Exactly. Enter SN Goenka, the hardware scanner.
Goenka? Now, even I've heard of them. The 10-day silent retreats, right?
The Vipassana retreats, yeah. Goenka was a student of Yubokin, the accountant general we just talked about, and Goenka's absolute genius was in global enterprise deployment.
He franchised enlightenment.
In the best possible way, yes. He standardized the teaching, he was a brilliant businessman, and he realized that if he relied on individual teachers, the message would get corrupted over time. People would add their own spin, their own bloatware.
What was his solution?
He used audio and video recordings. He recorded the instructions once, perfectly. And now, whether you are in a center in California or India or Germany, you are hearing the exact same source code from the master himself. You are getting the pure, unadulterated transmission.
That is true scalability. That's how you prevent a fork.
It's the McDonald's of Dharma, and I mean that as a compliment to its consistency and quality control. You know exactly what you are getting every single time.
And his specific technique, the body scan.
He called it bioelectric feedback in the manual. He taught users that the primary interface for reality isn't your thoughts. You can't think your way out of the simulation.
We try to, though. Lord knows we try to overthink everything.
We do. But Gogena said the real interface is sensation vedana. He taught millions of people to slowly, methodically sweep their attention through the body, scanning for lag and resistance.
Scanning the hardware for glitches.
Precisely. If you feel a knot in your shoulder, that's not just a tight muscle. That's a stored sankara, a stored reaction, a piece of malware. By scanning it with equanimity, with a balanced mind, you allow the system to process it and you delete the file. He shifted the focus from the mental software to the physical hardware where all the trauma is actually stored.
It's amazing to see how each developer added a specific critical module. Sariputta built the database, Anuruddha compressed it. Yubakin optimized the speed, Mahasi drew the map, Goenka scaled the deployment.
It's a complete stack, but there was still one problem lingering in the culture around it.
What's that?
A culture of secrecy.
Secrecy. How so?
For a long, long time, especially in the more traditional monastic circles, talking about your attainments, saying, I am at stage 4 or I am an arhat, was a huge taboo. It was considered arrogant, rude. It was hidden behind these unwritten NDAs.
Social NDAs. I like that. So the first rule of Enlightenment Club is you do not talk about Enlightenment Club.
Exactly. And that keeps people in the dark. It makes the ultimate goal feel impossible, mythical, like something only for ancient people in robes.
Enter the modern era. Segment 4. The whistleblowers and scientists.
And the man who kicked down the door is Daniel Ingram, the whistleblower.
Whistleblower.
Daniel.
He wrote the book, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And I get the sense he is a polarizing figure.
He is a very controversial figure. He's an emergency room doctor, and he calls himself an arhat, a fully enlightened being. In traditional circles, you just don't do that. You get canceled.
But the TPS project honors him. So why? Why is he in the lineage?
Because he leaked the dev notes. He demanded absolute transparency. He said, look, this isn't magic, it's engineering, and if you follow the instructions precisely, you can and will get the result.
The source material says he claimed God mode is technically possible for modern people.
That was the leak. He said, I did it, my friends did it, you can do it. Here are the precise technical instructions. Stop pretending it's impossible. He stripped away all the false humility that was keeping people stuck in legacy mode.
He validated that the endgame content is actually playable. It's not just a myth that's been locked for 2,000 years.
Right. And he brought the hardcore Dharma movement to the internet. He created forums where people could compare their log files, their meditation experiences completely openly. Hey, I'm seeing strobing lights at 10 hertz. Is this normal? Yes, that's the AMP stage. Don't worry. That kind of peer review just didn't exist in a public way before him.
So Ingram brings the transparency. But we still need to bridge the gap to this secular scientific world. We need someone who speaks math, who speaks science.
And that is Shinzen Young, the science liaison.
Shinzen. The source calls his work algorithmic mindfulness. It sounds very TPS.
Shinzen is the bridge. He's a genius translator. He takes the mystical language, emptiness, nirvana, the void, and he translates it into the language of mathematics and calculus and information theory.
The source mentions a periodic table of sense experience.
Yes. He breaks down the self into its component parts, visual and auditory processing loops. We'll say, the self is just a feedback loop between see in, hear in, and feel in. He gives you a clear algorithm, note the sensory event, track its components, and deconstruct it.
Why does he fit the TPS lineage so well?
Because he turned vague spiritual terms into precise, testable algorithms. He teaches you how to navigate the bugs that appear when you overclock your attention. If you were running the simulation at high-speed trillions per second, you need Shinzen's level of precision to avoid crashing the system. He explains why the hack works using the laws of physics and signal processing.
It's like he's writing the API documentation for the human brain.
He is. He absolutely is. And he's making it compatible with the scientific materialism that most of us run as our default operating system.
So we have the team, we have the lineage, we have the ethos. But how does this all come together in the TPS project itself? We're at segment 5 now, the Centaur workflow in the future.
This is the synthesis. This is where it all clicks together. The TPS author, C4 Chaos, isn't claiming to be a new messiah. He isn't inventing new code from scratch. He's very, very explicit about that.
He's standing on the shoulders of giants.
The TPS project is a refactor. That is the critical term from the devlogs. A refactor in coding means you take existing working code and you clean it up. You improve the variable names, you make it run smoother, more efficiently. You don't change the core function, you just improve the implementation.
So TPS takes the atomic data units from Sariputta.
Check. The voxels.
It takes the logging tool, noting from Mahasi.
Check.
It takes the hardware scan from Goenka.
Check.
And it takes the transparency from Ingram and the science from Shinsen.
And it wraps them all in a simulation theory user interface.
That's the wrapper. That's the modern skin on this ancient engine.
Exactly, because simulation theory is the native language of the 21st century. We understand video games, we understand lag, we understand rendering engines. By using these metaphors, TPS makes these ancient, powerful tools finally click for a modern user.
It validates the technical roadmap. It proves that the kernel specs, the 4 axioms, are not theoretical. They're not just beliefs.
Let's look at those kernel specs one last time through the lens of this incredible lineage. The 4 noble truths, refactored.
Axiom 1, Dukkha.
The lineage tells us this isn't just sadness or suffering, it is latency. It is the friction that Yu Baqian identified when the clock speed is off. It's the lag in the system.
Axiom 2, Samudaya. The cause of the latency.
It's the resource hog. It's the self-process that Sariputta deconstructed into data tables. It's an infinite loop running in the background, consuming all your CPU cycles, trying to hold on to things that are already gone.
Axiom 3, Nirodha, cessation, the end of it.
Zero lag. The state that Daniel Ingram verified is actually possible. The system running perfectly, with total efficiency, without the interference of the rootkit malware of the self. The screen goes black for a moment, and the system reboots. Clean.
And Axiom 4, MAGA, the path to get there.
The master protocol. The detailed step-by-step instructions preserved by Buddhaghosa, mapped out by Mahasi, and scaled for global deployment by Goenka.
It's all there. It really is a complete end-to-end stack.
It is, and acknowledging this lineage validates the code. If this was just one guy writing a blog post in his basement, you could dismiss it. You could say, oh, that's just his opinion. But this is 2,500 years of peer-reviewed, open-source development, millions of beta testers, thousands of contributors.
It's the most robust piece of software ever written.
I would argue yes. And now, thanks to this lineage, we have the documentation in a language we can actually understand. We don't have to learn Pali. We don't have to become monks. We just have to read the manual and actually do the work.
Which brings us to the final thought. We've looked at the developers who built the code. We've seen the incredible commitment. The guy who spent a fortune to print the sutra in 868. The guy who meticulously mapped the mind in a cave. The accountant who optimized it between meetings.
It's a living lineage. That's the really important part. It didn't end with Shinzen or C4 chaos.
Read the P2P network.
The listeners, you, the person listening to this deep dive right now, you are not just an audience member, you are the new node in this network.
The code is open source. You can fork it, you can improve it, you can optimize it.
But first, you have to run it.
So here is the provocative thought for you to take away today. We've looked at the developers who built the code. Now the question is, you have the manual, you have the patch notes, and you have the legacy of the greatest hackers in history behind you. Are you going to leave the software running in legacy mode, glitching out on the same old loops day after day? Or are you ready to install the update?
That is the question. The download is complete. The installation wizard is ready to go. The only thing missing is your permission to run the executable.
The prompt is blinking on the screen. YN?
Press enter.
Well, thank you for joining us on this tribute to the open source lineage of the TPS protocol. It's been a fascinating look at the giants we stand on.
It's been an honor to review the commit history with you.
Until next time, keep hacking.